The first thing to fall was her wine glass. Then her voice cracked. And then her knees buckled. I hadn't said a word. I was standing near the projector screen, halfway through a boring keynote about digital infrastructure funding, when I saw her. She was 30 feet away, facing the opposite direction, gesturing with her hands like she always did when she was trying to dominate a conversation. The kind of gesturing that said, "Listen to me. I know exactly what I'm doing." She didn't. Not 3 years ago. And certainly not now. When she turned, not even all the way, just a quarter glance over her shoulder, her entire face changed. Her mouth opened slightly. Her fingers froze midair. The room kept buzzing with polite clapping and fake laughter, but in her world, it had just gone silent. The glass dropped. The stem snapped as it hit the floor, sending shards across the gray carpet in an explosion of white wine and red fingernail polish. Then came the tears. She didn't cry the way you're supposed to cry at events like this, the discreet swipe of a tissue in the restroom. No. She cried like her soul had just burst. People turned. A couple whispered. One woman gasped. Her coworker touched her arm and asked something I couldn't hear. She didn't answer. She walked, stumbled, toward me. I didn't move. She stopped right in front of me, chest heaving, eyeliner smeared down her cheeks like war paint. Her lips trembled. Her jaw moved, but no sound came out. Finally, she whispered my name. Once. Like it was something that hurt her to say. But I said nothing. I just looked at her. 3 years ago, she left with a lie and a duffel bag. She said she was flying out to consult on a project in Boston. She kissed me on the cheek, told me not to wait up, and never came home. No calls. No texts. Just a photo the next week on someone else's social media, her, in a swimsuit, on a boat, sitting on the lap of the guy she said was just an old friend. That friend? Yeah, he'd been sending her money. He paid for her yoga retreat, for her self-discovery, for the apartment she secretly signed the lease on while still sharing a bed with me. I didn't yell. I didn't show up at her job. I disappeared. And now, she was the one collapsing under the weight of it all, surrounded by strangers, in a building full of mirrors, unable to breathe because the past had finally caught up to her in a navy suit and a blank stare. She tried to speak again, but her throat gave out. Someone offered her water. Someone else tried to usher her away. She wouldn't move. She just stared at me, like I was the only thing keeping her from drowning. And still, I said nothing, because I knew what she was about to say, and I needed her to say it, out loud, in front of everyone. But not yet. Not before she felt it. She stood in front of me like someone dangling off the edge of a cliff, waiting for a hand to pull her back. But I wasn't offering mine. Her eyes searched my face, probably looking for some kind of softness. A trace of the old me. The version of Ellery who once woke her up with coffee and folded her laundry because she hated socks with stiff corners. But that guy didn't come to this event. That guy died in a cheap studio apartment 3 years ago, when she left, and I realized no one was coming to save me from the loneliness she'd carefully wrapped around me like plastic wrap. She opened her mouth. Ellery, I didn't know you'd be here. That was her first sentence. Not, I'm sorry. Not, you look well. Just that. I blinked. Once. My expression didn't change. I didn't give her anything to hold on to. People were still watching. Not all of them, but enough. One of the VPs glanced over, clearly trying to decide if this was a mental breakdown or just bad shrimp cocktail. Junie's coworker, some guy with hair too perfect to trust, tried to pull her aside gently. Junie, you okay? You're really pale. She didn't move. I thought you moved to Oregon, she blurted, her voice cracking. After everything, I figured you were gone. She had no idea. No clue that I'd been living 45 minutes away this entire time. That I'd spent 18 months sleeping on a mattress on the floor, staring at the ceiling like it owed me answers. That I'd eaten rice and frozen corn for 2 weeks because I couldn't afford groceries after the divorce left me with next to nothing. That I'd listened to voicemail recordings of her voice just to remember what it felt like to be spoken to. And yet here she was, stunned, trembling, mascara melting like ink down her cheeks, shocked that I'd dared to exist in her world again. She tried again. Please, just hear me out. I didn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because silence was the only thing I ever got from her when I needed answers. And now it was her turn to sit in it. Junie's fingers twitched like she was reaching for something invisible. Maybe she thought if she touched my arm, I'd dissolve into the man I used to be, the one who looked the other way when she was late for the 10th night in a row, or who excused the lipstick smudges on her wine glass that weren't her shade. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I was just lost. I raised an eyebrow. Just slightly. She took it as permission to continue. Kyle lied to me. He said he was getting divorced. He said he had an apartment ready for us in Seattle. But there was no apartment. There was no divorce. I was just his weekend. And by the time I realized it, I couldn't come back. Not after what I did to you. There it was. The first drop of honesty I'd heard from her since the day she vanished. I could feel my hands curling into fists inside my jacket pockets. Not out of rage. Out of restraint. Because part of me wanted to laugh, not out loud, but with that kind of bitter internal snort that says, "Oh, now you get it?" I didn't owe her closure. But I wanted something. I wanted her to bleed out emotionally in front of the very people she used to impress. I wanted her to stand there, naked in truth, while everyone in that overpriced conference hall saw what she really was beneath the curated Instagram smile and team lead charm. She looked around. People had stopped pretending to mind their own business. A few even whispered her name. Someone started recording on their phone. That's when she stepped closer, voice shaking. "I still have your book, you know. The one you wrote notes in about constellations. You always looked at the stars when you couldn't sleep. I kept it. I don't know why. I guess part of me." "Don't," I said, finally. Just one word. Sharp. Final. Unforgiving. And that single syllable shattered her. Her knees actually gave out for a moment, and she had to grip the edge of the table behind her to steady herself. That might have been the moment I realized she hadn't prepared for this. Not truly. She expected me to be angry, maybe even cruel, but not indifferent, not calm, not the version of me that had nothing left to lose and therefore no reason to comfort her. I leaned in slightly, close enough that only she could hear. "You remember all the things I did for you?" I whispered. "I want you to remember one more. I want you to remember this moment, this silence, this look, for the rest of your life." And with that, I turned and walked away. But that wasn't the end. Because 10 minutes later, a security guard found me outside on the hotel's rooftop deck, holding a handwritten letter she left behind on my table, tucked beneath a folded napkin. A letter filled with confessions, names, lies, and a single sentence that would change everything I thought I knew about what happened 3 years ago. And trust me, I didn't see it coming. Not even close. The letter wasn't sealed. Just folded twice, corner pressed down, still warm from her palms. It smelled faintly of citrus, the same scent she used to wear back when we'd fall asleep on the couch watching those terrible documentary series she insisted were educational. Back then, I'd have followed that scent anywhere. Now it smelled like a warning. I didn't open it immediately. I stood on the rooftop, staring out over the city. It was dusk, the sky bruised with purple and orange. A group of interns laughed near the railing, one of them balancing a plate of shrimp cocktail like it was a newborn. I could hear the event music drifting up through the vents, some bouncy instrumental tune meant to lighten the mood. It didn't reach me. I unfolded the letter with numb fingers, half expecting it to be blank. But it wasn't. The first line was shaky. "I don't know what you see when you look at me now, but I don't see myself anymore either." What followed wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It wasn't dramatic or poetic. It was a breakdown in ink, part confessional, part timeline, part accusation. She listed names. Not just Kyle, the man she left me for. No. She mentioned others. 3, to be exact. I recognized one of them. Alan. Her co-worker from the marketing department. He used to call our house after hours, asking for feedback on concept pitches. At the time, I thought it was charming that she worked so closely with her team. Turns out she worked very closely. She wrote, "It didn't start with Kyle. I told myself it wasn't cheating if I never slept over, if I kept you out of it. But every lie I told stacked like bricks between us. By the time I left, I couldn't see you anymore through the wall I built." I clenched the paper so hard the edges creased. But then I hit a line that stopped me cold. She wrote, "I wasn't planning to leave you that day. I was supposed to come home. I had even bought groceries. But Kyle showed up early. He told me something that made everything snap." I read that sentence 5 times. It made no sense. I turned the page over. At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, she wrote, "You were never supposed to find out about the offshore account. He threatened to tell you everything. About the money. About the foundation. About what your father left behind." I froze. My father? He died 7 years earlier, a quiet man. Worked maintenance for 35 years at the same high school. Left me an old coin collection and a letter that said, "I'm proud of you, even if you never stopped doubting yourself." That was it. No mention of any foundation. No offshore anything. But Junie, She'd just written something that cracked the earth beneath me. I stood there, letter in hand, feeling like I'd just stepped into a much larger story, one I didn't even know I'd been a character in. She knew something. She'd hidden something. And Kyle, the man she'd left me for, had used that secret as leverage. I suddenly remembered how, in our last year together, she had started asking strange questions. Casual, almost silly at the time. Did your dad ever mention that job he turned down in '89? Did you know there's a scholarship fund in your last name online? I always laughed it off. She was curious. She liked puzzles. But now, I was the puzzle. And Junie had just dropped a jagged piece into my lap. I folded the letter, slipped it into my coat pocket, and walked back inside the hotel, not to confront her again, but to find someone else. I needed to speak with Alan, because if what she'd written was true, he wasn't just a name in the betrayal. He might have been the first, and maybe, the one who knew everything. Alan was across the room, standing near the coffee cart like he'd been waiting for someone to recognize him. He always had that energy, like the guy who laughs too loudly at a joke no one told. When I first met him years ago at one of Junie's office parties, he shook my hand with both of his and said, "Ellery, you're the famous husband." I remember thinking, I'm not famous. I barely exist in that office. But I smiled anyway. That's what you do when you're a husband. You smile and swallow the weirdness. Now, as I approached him in that over-air-conditioned ballroom, the only thing I felt was a strange tightening in my chest. I didn't know if it was anger or anxiety. Probably both. He didn't notice me right away. He was talking to a woman in HR, charming her with a story about a vineyard he accidentally invested in. When I got closer, he glanced over and froze mid-sentence. Just a flicker, a single stutter in his words, but I caught it. The look in his eyes wasn't recognition. It was calculation. "Ellery," he said, like we were old pals. "Wow, it's been, what, for years?" "3, I said, flatly. Right. How's Portland?" "I live here." "Oh." That caught him off guard. "Well, small world, huh?" I didn't respond. I just stared at him. He glanced over my shoulder. "Is Junie with you?" The words made something churn inside me. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. She just had a full-blown emotional collapse in front of half the event staff. "So no, not exactly with me." His smile faltered. I didn't realize. "You ever talked to her after she left?" A pause. "Once or twice. She was going through a rough patch. Kyle didn't exactly turn out to be Mr. Reliable. She mentioned you in her letter." There it was, a visible tightening around his eyes. Not shock. Not confusion. Just a quick inventory check. Like he was trying to remember which version of the truth he had told and whether it was about to fall apart. "She said you were the first," I continued, quietly. "Before Kyle. Before the others." Alan swallowed hard. He didn't deny it. "She also said there was something about my dad. Something she found. Something Kyle used to push her out of my life." Alan exhaled slowly, then glanced around us. "This isn't really the place." "Then take me to the place." A pause. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. "There's a service hallway behind the stage. Follow me." We slipped out of the event floor and into the dim corridor behind the venue's kitchen. The music became muffled. The lights were harsh and buzzing. It smelled like lemon cleaner and old coffee grounds. Here, finally, Alan stopped walking. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I didn't know she'd tell you," he said. "You knew about my father?" He hesitated. "Not at first. But Junie got curious a couple of years before she left you. She said she found a receipt, something weird. A wire transfer to an account in Belize under your dad's name. She thought maybe he'd been hiding money, or had a secret life." "That's insane," I said. "My dad was a janitor. He wore the same pair of New Balance sneakers for a decade." "I thought the same," Alan admitted. "But Junie got obsessed. She started digging old emails, your family tax records, anything she could find. She said there were gaps, missing statements. She said someone had scrubbed your father's retirement account around 2014. My breath caught. That was the year Dad had his heart attack. The same year he suddenly stopped talking about retirement plans and started acting nervous whenever I asked if he needed help with bills. I thought it was pride. Why didn't she tell me?" I asked, my voice raw. "Because Kyle got to her first," Alan said. "He worked in banking compliance. He found what she was looking into. And he threatened her." "Threatened her how?" Alan lowered his eyes. "He said if she didn't leave you, he'd report the entire trail to the IRS, say your father laundered money through a nonprofit, and that you were benefiting. He scared her. She didn't want you dragged into it. So she left. cold and clean. I staggered back a step. It was too much. Too fast. She destroyed me. I whispered. And all this time, she thought she was protecting me? Alan nodded once. She made a lot of awful choices. But I think she thought she was taking the hit for both of you. The hallway spun. For 3 years, I thought she left for someone better. Someone more exciting. I thought she traded me in like old furniture. But now I stood in a janitor's corridor learning that her betrayal wasn't simple. It wasn't just selfishness. It was panic, manipulation, a cover-up. And Kyle, the man who'd vanished after Junie's breakdown, was still out there. I turned to leave. What are you going to do? Alan asked. I'm going to find Kyle, I said. And then, I looked back at him. And for the first time that night, I smiled, just barely. Then I'm going to ask him one question. What he thinks I'll do when I finally remember everything Junie didn't write down. I didn't go home that night. After my conversation with Alan, I drove around the city for almost an hour. The letter in my jacket pocket and Junie's broken expression still burned into my mind. My thoughts spiraled like wet laundry in a dryer. Always loud, always spinning, never coming out clean. The streets blurred past in streaks of white and amber. I didn't have a destination. Just a question on repeat in my head. What the hell did my father leave behind? I finally pulled over in front of an old, crumbling public library on Wilmer Street. It was closed, of course, but I wasn't looking for books. I was looking for somewhere quiet, somewhere not dripping in champagne and LED lighting. Somewhere that didn't remind me of what my life had become, or what it never was to begin with. I sat in my car and reread Junie's letter under the dim dome light. There were more details I'd skimmed the first time, and as I read them again, a chill began to spread through me like a slow leak. She wrote about a file, a single folder, physical, not digital, that she had found hidden in a box of Christmas decorations in our old apartment. She hadn't told me because, at the time, she thought it was just one of my father's strange quirks. He always did love hiding things in plain sight, she wrote. But the folder wasn't filled with old receipts or tax forms. It was something else entirely, a letter in my dad's handwriting, addressed not to me, but to someone named Isaac Rowe. The name meant nothing to me. According to Junie, the letter detailed a set of repayment instructions, large sums wired to a Belizean trust over several years, marked as settlement installments. She didn't know what they were settling, but she kept digging. She thought maybe my dad had been blackmailed, or had blackmailed someone else. But here's the part that shook me the most. She claimed that Kyle had once worked for the firm managing the Rowe Trust. That's how he found out. That's how he had leverage. And then she wrote, if he disappears, don't assume it means he's done. Kyle doesn't disappear. He relocates. That line stuck with me as I sat in my car under the flickering streetlight, listening to the ticking sound of my cooling engine. I didn't know what I was in the middle of, but I knew I wasn't crazy anymore for thinking there had always been something underneath the surface of my father's quiet life and my wife's exit. I opened my laptop. My hands were shaking. I started searching. Rowe Trust. Nothing. Isaac Rowe plus Belize. Just political nonsense. Then I tried something else. Kyle Matheson Banking Compliance Firm. And there it was. Not on LinkedIn. Not in any real bio. But buried in an archived press release from 2017. Kyle Matheson, formerly of Rowe and Darnell Financial, joins Westbrook Compliance as Senior Fraud Analyst. Rowe and Darnell. My stomach turned. I went back and typed, Rowe and Darnell plus fraud. 3 hits. All of them buried. One was a case summary from a whistleblower report dated 2016. Allegations of internal money laundering and misuse of nonprofit donations. No names mentioned, no charges filed. But the location listed on the document? Portland. My hometown. My father's hometown. Everything was converging. Junie, Kyle, the trust, my dad's missing pension, and now, the name Rowe. But the worst part wasn't that I'd been left in the dark. It was that someone had kept me there on purpose. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it. Heart thudding. I answered. A voice I didn't recognize, low, controlled, and firm, said, Mr. Rains. It's time you stopped asking questions. Click. The line went dead. I stared at the screen like it had just insulted me. My whole body was electric. My pulse roared in my ears. For a brief second, I thought maybe this was all paranoia, just a chain of coincidences. But then I noticed something. On the corner of my windshield, under the wiper, was a small slip of paper. I got out slowly, scanned the empty street. Nothing. I took the paper. Written in blocky red marker was a single phrase. You weren't supposed to be at that event. I didn't sleep that night. And the next morning, when I checked my email, my work login had been revoked. No warning. No explanation. They'd erased me, just like Junie had. Only this time, I wasn't going quietly. I didn't go back to my apartment. After finding the note under my windshield and waking to discover my work login was revoked, I spent the morning in a rented sedan with tinted windows, paid in cash, parked 3 blocks from my place, engine off, phone wrapped in aluminum foil and powered down. I know that sounds paranoid, but paranoia is a luxury until someone removes your digital identity without explanation. By 9:30 a.m., my building manager had already called twice. Voicemail transcripts read, "Hey Mr. Rains, just checking, your mailbox has been opened, and your name tag is gone from the buzzer. Did you authorize that?" No, I didn't authorize any of it, but someone had. I pulled Junie's letter from my jacket and reread the last line she'd written. If you're reading this, I've already lost control of the story. It hit me then, she wasn't writing to confess. She was writing because she didn't think she'd get another chance. I drove to the only place that still felt untouched, the garage where my dad kept his old stuff, the one I'd been too afraid to empty out after he died. I had the keys. I'd held on to them for no reason other than guilt. The place was exactly how I remembered it. Concrete floor, wood-paneled walls warped by decades of humidity, the faint scent of motor oil and forgotten tools. It was a time capsule of a man who never updated anything. Old fishing rods, a rusty snowblower, milk crates filled with extension cords he'd never labeled. And in the back, behind a tower of flattened cardboard boxes, was a locked metal filing cabinet I hadn't touched in 7 years. I didn't have the key, but my father wasn't exactly creative. I checked the toolbox on the shelf nearby, opened the bottom drawer, and found an envelope labeled "Raccoon Trap, Backup Key." Sure enough, inside was a small brass key. I opened the cabinet, and I found a single black binder labeled in my dad's handwriting, "Our 1989 to 1996. R. Isaac Rowe." I flipped it open, expecting financial records or business notes. What I found instead was a series of printed photographs, paper clipped together, all marked with dates in red ink. Each one showed the same man. Gray suit, square jaw, thinning hair, sunglasses, photographed from a distance, always alone, always looking over his shoulder like he knew he was being followed. Some of the photos were from airports, others from hotel lobbies. A few were from what looked like the interior of a courtroom. They were dated between 1989 and 1996. One of the photos made my stomach twist. It was taken in 1992, in front of the Portland Federal Building. And standing in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was my father, looking directly at the camera. On the back of the photo, written in pen, "Payment confirmed. He'll be protected as long as the installments continue." I sat down on the cold garage floor. My father was involved in something bigger than I ever knew. And now I was sitting on the edge of that same cliff, looking down, wondering how long it had been crumbling beneath me. A folder was tucked into the back of the binder, labeled "Miscellaneous," not for Junie. Inside was a hand-drawn diagram of interconnected names and arrows. My name was at the center. Circling it were others I didn't recognize. But 2 stood out: Carl Matheson and Alan Fortner. Alan, the coworker. The man who acted like he just found out about all this. But here he was, in my dad's handwriting, labeled "Recruit." Recruit? To what? What the hell had my father been involved in? And why had Junie never mentioned these photos? This binder? Then I noticed something else. Folded inside the folder was an envelope addressed to me. No stamp. No return label. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My father's handwriting again. "Ellery, if you're reading this, it means they failed to erase the trail. You were never meant to know. Not because I didn't trust you. Because I didn't want you to be hunted. But if you're already in it, then you need to finish what I couldn't. Start with the man who smiled too easily. He's not what he pretends to be. None of them are." I sat there for a long time. The sun moved across the open garage door like it was trying to hurry me along. But I couldn't move. My life, my marriage, my grief, even my understanding of my own father, had just been turned inside out. And for the first time since Junie walked out of our apartment 3 years ago, I realized something I'd never dared to consider. She might have left to save me, but now I had to decide if she was still worth saving. Because the moment I left that garage, I'd be in it for real. and someone out there was already trying to wipe me off the board. I didn't hear the knock. What I heard first was the shadow shift across the frosted glass of the front door, that slight distortion of light when someone stands still, just long enough to set off the animal part of your brain. I was back at the apartment, not my usual one, but the one I used to sublet before I got promoted. It still existed under an old account. I kept it like a forgotten diary, small, unfurnished, lifeless. It had become my hideout. After what I found in my father's garage, the photos, the names, the envelope, I didn't go back to my real address. I left my phone in a public restroom. I bought a burner. I closed every browser tab I'd ever opened. I deleted every cloud storage folder, every backup. For the first time in years, I was completely offline. That's why the knock didn't make sense. No one should have known I was here. And yet, when I peeked through the side window, there she was. Junie, hair tied back, sunglasses in her hand, a jacket 2 sizes too big, like she hadn't planned to leave wherever she'd been staying. I didn't open the door. She waited. Then, without knocking again, she pulled something from her coat pocket. Not a phone, not another letter. A photograph. She pressed it against the glass and waited. I didn't move, but I could see it, grainy, black and white, like it was printed on an old copier. A man standing next to a silver SUV. Not Kyle. Not Alan. Me. The photo was taken 2 days ago, the night I was on the hotel rooftop reading her letter. The angle suggested height. A window. A distant building. She had been watched, and so had I. Only then did I unlock the deadbolt and let her in. She didn't speak at first. Her eyes scanned the room like she was making sure no one else was here. Then, with the calm of someone walking across a minefield, she said, "They're not just after you." I closed the door. She sat down on the floor, not the chair. She looked up at me like she used to in our worst fights. Not angry, not scared, but already broken. "They went after Alan," she whispered. "Yesterday morning. His apartment was torched. No announcement. No police. No press. Just gone." I stared at her, trying to read the angle. "You're saying he's dead?" "I don't know, but I went by the building myself. There's nothing left, and they're using it as a warning. To you, to us." She slid the photograph across the floor. "I didn't give them that," she added. "I found it taped to the bathroom mirror in the place I've been staying. They know where you've been. They knew you'd find the garage." I ran my hand down my face, already feeling the heat rising in my skull. "Why didn't you tell me about the binder?" I asked. "The photos, the diagram, the envelope from my father." She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "Because I didn't want to believe what it meant." "What do you think it meant?" "That your father wasn't protecting you from something. He was building you into something. Slowly, quietly, and you were too decent to realize it." The room went cold. I remembered the day after my dad's funeral. I was sitting in the kitchen, sorting through his personal effects, when I found a locked box I couldn't open. I thought it was full of his army medals, or maybe old documents from the school. I left it sealed. Still have it in storage somewhere. But now I wondered if that box held the rest of the story. Junie reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. "This was in Kyle's car," she said. "I found it after he left it parked outside a gym last week. I've been watching him. I've been terrified. But when I plugged this in, everything changed." I took the drive. My fingers hesitated before touching it. It felt heavier than it should have. "It's not just about your father," she said. "It's about what he helped build, about who funded it, and about the 3 names they're still hunting." I looked up. 3. She nodded. "You, me, and someone named Rowan." I didn't know the name, but the way she said it, the way her lips trembled afterward, told me she did. "Who's Rowan?" I asked. Her eyes met mine, and she whispered, "My sister." I felt the floor slip beneath me. She never told me she had a sister. Never once. And now, in this half-lit apartment with no furniture and no future, I realized that the woman I'd married had only ever shown me half of herself, and the other half had just kicked open the door. She stood up and walked toward the window. "They're going to come for us. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Soon. I can feel it. They already erased your digital access. Mine's next. We have one chance to finish this." "To do what?" I asked. "Take down Kyle? Take down a 30-year-old ghost network my father never even named." Junie turned, and in her face was something I hadn't seen since the day we met. Not love, not sorrow. Purpose. "No," she said. "To remind them we're not ghosts. We're the unfinished chapter." And in that moment, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like the story was just beginning. 3 weeks later, I woke up to silence. Not the kind that follows fear, the kind that follows a storm. I was in a small guest house on the Oregon coast, tucked between a dense patch of pines and the roar of the Pacific. There was no Wi-Fi, no television, no digital trail of my name. Just paperbacks, a kettle, and Junie asleep on the couch, one hand still clutching a file folder she had read a dozen times. We'd made it out. Barely. The flash drive Junie had stolen cracked open the last of the code. Inside were audio files, quiet meetings in parking garages, money being moved across foundations, timelines, names. Not just Kyle. Not just my father. But other men and women, most of them long retired, their sins diluted in years of silence. We didn't send it to the media. That would have been suicide. Instead, we went to someone else. A former investigator, a man Rowan had once trusted, and who owed her more than one favor. We handed him the files. We let him decide the path forward. I still don't know what he did, but the messages stopped. The surveillance vanished. My name reappeared in the system at work quietly, as if I'd never been erased at all. And Kyle? He disappeared. No obituary. No arrests. Just gone. Junie and I didn't talk about him after that. Not because we forgot, but because we no longer had to explain what silence cost us. We never moved back in together. Too much had happened. Too many cracks. But we stayed in touch. And when she suggested the guest house, I didn't say no. I needed a place to breathe. She needed a place to feel human again. And for the first time since the night she left, I didn't look at her and see betrayal. I saw someone who made the worst choice for what she thought was the right reason, and who came back when it would have been easier to stay gone. That morning, as the wind dragged sea air through the window and the kettle started to whistle, I found something tucked under my book. An envelope. My name, in her handwriting. Inside was a single page. I'm not asking for us. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for you to take your life back. For your father. For the parts of you that never got to feel proud. For the nights you spent alone thinking no one would ever tell you the truth. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. And you never were. Jay. I read it twice. Then I walked outside. The sun was rising, slow and quiet, laying gold across the edge of the trees. And for the first time in 3 years, I let it touch my face. Not as a ghost, but as someone alive again.